Can sponge cities really stop the next mega flood? In 2012, Beijing was hit with 460 millimeters of rain in just 16 hours. 79 people died. The problem wasn't just the storm, it was the concrete. Sound familiar? It should. The same story is played out in Copenhagen, Auckland, Jakarta, and hundreds of cities in between. We built our cities to drain water fast. We forgot to ask where it would go. Now cities around the world are trying something radically different. They're called sponge cities, and the idea is exactly what it sounds like. But does it actually work? In this video, we'll break down the 3 secret layers of sponge design, the fatal flaw that could cause these projects to fail, and why cities from Copenhagen to Singapore are quietly rewriting their relationship with rain. Let's get into it. The idea of sponge cities was popularized by the visionary Chinese landscape architect Kongjian Yu, who tragically passed away in September 2025 at age 62 in a plane crash while filming a documentary on wetlands in Brazil. He was a professor at Peking University and had been warning about urban flood risks since the early 2000s. He argued that rapid urbanization had erased the very systems that once protected cities. We don't see any wetlands, ponds, rice paddies, floodplains, or seasonal waterways in our cities. Between 1978 and the early 2000s, China urbanized at historic speed. The country paved over huge areas of land. In many cities, natural infiltration zones were replaced with concrete, pushing runoff rates from roughly 10% in natural landscapes to more than 60% in highly sealed urban areas. Water that once soaked into the soil now rushed straight into drains. You proposed that instead of expanding pipes endlessly, we should redesign cities to behave more like ecosystems. We should design cities that absorb water, not just drain it. So what does a sponge city, or more broadly, a rain-resilient urban system, actually look like? Picture a city layered in 3 complementary ways: blue, green, and grey. Blue represents water spaces. These include rivers, lakes, constructed wetlands, ponds, and canals designed to temporarily store stormwater. In nature-based planning, rivers are often widened and reconnected to floodplains. Wetlands are restored to act as natural retention basins. Some parks are built in a way to store tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, of cubic meters of rainwater during major storms. For example, Bangkok's Benjakitty Forest Park, which was designed by Yu's firm Turenscape, can hold 187,500 cubic meters of stormwater. The green layer is the absorption layer. This includes parks, rain gardens, bioswales, green roofs, tree corridors, and permeable landscapes. These spaces allow rainfall to infiltrate soil rather than run off instantly. These areas act like distributed micro-reservoirs across the city. Green roofs alone can reduce runoff from individual buildings by 50 to 80% during moderate rainfall events. Urban vegetation also lowers surface temperatures by several degrees, which helps counter the urban heat island effect. Other than that, soil and plant systems naturally filter pollutants such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and heavy metals before water re-enters rivers or aquifers. Next, we have the grey layer. This is the infrastructure that makes up the city. Cities still need roads, bridges, subways, and buildings. But in sponge cities, even grey elements are redesigned. Streets can use permeable pavement, which allows water to seep into sublayers instead of flowing across asphalt. Parking lots can be built with porous materials. Public squares can also be improved to temporarily hold floodwater during cloudbursts and drain afterward. Residential buildings can integrate rainwater harvesting systems to reuse stormwater for irrigation or flushing. In some pilot districts, underground storage tanks are combined with green surfaces above, creating hybrid systems. Eliminating flooding entirely is unrealistic, especially as extreme rainfall events are becoming more intense. The goal here is to reduce peak runoff and slow the movement of water. This will also help prevent drainage systems from being overwhelmed. Instead of one massive surge hitting pipes at once, water is absorbed and released gradually. The great thing is these systems can reuse up to 70% of rainwater. This reduces dependence on freshwater extraction. Natural filtration through soil and plant systems also improves water quality. Not only that, it lowers urban temperatures and increases biodiversity. Encouraged by those benefits, China decided to scale the idea nationwide. In 2014, China's central government formally adopted sponge city construction as national urban policy. In 2015, the first batch of 16 pilot cities was selected. The following year, another 14 cities were added. That made 30 major urban areas tasked with testing sponge principles at scale. Cities like Wuhan, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Xiamen, Zhenjiang and Beijing were all included. These were not small towns, you know. Many were megacities with millions of residents and complex drainage systems already in place. Then China set up some targets. National guidelines stated that by 2030, 80% of urban areas in China should be capable of absorbing and reusing 70% of annual rainfall. The scale of investment reflects that ambition. Estimates from international institutions suggest that fully scaling hydro-resilient infrastructure nationwide could require hundreds of billions of dollars, potentially approaching $1 trillion over time. Even the early pilot phases covered hundreds of square kilometers of urban land, with costs often reaching 100 to 150 million yuan per square kilometer. This mega-project is complex because China is not building from scratch. Most sponge projects are retrofits, which means redesigning already dense, heavily paved cities. Roads have to be torn up, drainage layers have to be replaced, parks have to be redesigned, wetlands have to be restored in places where land values are high. Some cities have shown measurable results. In pilot districts, nature-based interventions have reduced stormwater runoff, improved water quality, and decreased surface water accumulation during moderate rainfall events. But the bet hasn't been smooth. Despite the sponge branding, severe floods still hit Chinese cities after implementation began. One example was Zhengzhou in July 2021. That year, extreme rainfall caused catastrophic flooding and nearly 400 deaths. That's when critics questioned whether sponge cities were failing. The reality is more complicated and more uncomfortable. And here is the fatal flaw. Most sponge projects operate at the district or neighbourhood level, not citywide. When rainfall intensity exceeds the design standard, even nature-based infrastructure can be overwhelmed. Research also shows uneven implementation in cases where cities adopted the label without fully building the infrastructure. In other words, the policy is great, the execution is not. Still, the bet remains historic. No country has ever attempted urban hydrological redesign at this scale. China is trying to shift from a 20th century drain-it-away model to a 21st century absorb and adapt model across hundreds of cities. It's risky and expensive. But as storms get crazier every year, China figured out you cannot outpipe the rain forever. And they aren't the only ones realizing that the old rules of construction are broken. From Singapore to Berlin, a global shift is underway. According to the World Economic Forum, up to 40% of global weather-related disasters are linked to flooding. With 4.4 billion people now living in cities, this is no longer a distant risk. It is an urban crisis, and cities around the world are starting to respond. Copenhagen learned this the hard way. On July 2nd, 2011, a single storm dumped so much rain in 2 hours that it caused nearly $2 billion in damage. The city had no answer for it, so it built one. Copenhagen's cloudburst management plan became one of the most ambitious flood redesigns in European history. Parks and public squares were rebuilt to double as temporary flood basins. Underground tunnels were excavated to absorb overflow, and green corridors were woven through the city to slow the movement of water. Copenhagen didn't just repair the damage, it rewrote how the city relates to rain. Singapore took a different path, not because it had more land, but because it had less. Squeezed onto a small island with one of the densest urban footprints in the world, Singapore had nowhere to sprawl, so instead it built upward and inward. Rooftop gardens now sit above office blocks, by swales run alongside roads. Vertical greenery climbs building facades, restored waterways cut through what were once concrete channels. Singapore proved that sponge thinking doesn't require space, it requires intention. Rotterdam went further still, turning flood infrastructure into something the city actually uses. Its water squares, public plazas engineered to collect stormwater during heavy rain, transform into recreational spaces the moment the weather clears. Children play where the floodwater sat the day before. It is one of the most elegant ideas in modern urban design. Infrastructure that earns its place every single day, not just during a crisis. Auckland, New Zealand sits at the other end of the spectrum. It didn't need to retrofit its way to sponginess. It was born that way. Around half of its surface is already covered by parks, lakes, and natural vegetation, earning it the top spot in Arup's Global Sponge City Index with a sponginess rating of 35%. By every measurable standard, Auckland was doing everything right. Then, in January 2023, it was hit by what officials described as the most significant climate event in New Zealand's recorded history. Billions of dollars in damage. Communities devastated. A city that topped the global rankings brought to its knees by a single storm. Auckland's story is perhaps the most sobering lesson in this entire conversation. Nature-given resilience is not a ceiling. It's a starting point. Even the world's spongiest city discovered it was not spongy enough. If nature alone isn't enough, then policy has to close the gap. Berlin understood that, after severe flash flooding in 2017 exposed how vulnerable even a well-resourced European capital could be. The city's response was quiet but consequential. Porous urbanism principles were written directly into development law. New buildings must retain the first 10 to 20 millimeters of rainfall on site. It won't transform the city overnight, but it means the Berlin being built today is fundamentally different from the one built a decade ago. And then there are cities running out of time. Jakarta is sinking, literally, at a rate that makes future flooding not a question of if, but when. Planners increasingly argue that a large-scale sponge redesign may be the only way to buy the city enough time to survive. The stakes there are not aesthetic or even economic, they are existential. What connects all of these cities, Copenhagen, Singapore, Rotterdam, Auckland, Berlin, Jakarta, is that none of them chose this path because it was easy. They chose it because the alternative was worse. This is no longer a Chinese experiment. It is becoming the only logical response to a world that is getting wetter, faster, and less forgiving. We started this video with 79 people dying in the rain. Not in a war zone, not in a natural disaster no one could have predicted. In a modern city, on an ordinary Saturday, because the ground beneath them had forgotten how to drink. That, to me, is the most important thing this video is really about. Not the engineering, not the $1 trillion, but the quiet, costly consequence of building cities that work against nature instead of with it. For decades, we poured concrete over everything and called it progress. Sponge cities are, in a sense, an admission that we were wrong. Do I think they'll work? I think they already are. Partially, imperfectly, and not nearly fast enough. The gap between a good policy and a fully built city is where people still die, and until that gap closes, no city is truly rainproof. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If your city flooded tomorrow, would it be ready? Or would it just be wet concrete and broken promises? If you want to keep exploring how the world is being redesigned, rebuilt, and rethought from the ground up, architecture, infrastructure, the cities of the future, the Design Zip channel is where that conversation lives. There's a lot more worth watching. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.